AI and big data, by which I mean using AI to analyse the results of flocks or herds or mortality data, and so on, to develop best practice. And also, ultimately, then, to use AI in farm management and actually to make decisions. Just very unfortunately, in agriculture, you probably know AI already has made, and it means artificial insemination. Obviously, there's a connection because you can assess sperm with AI, but I will probably use alternatives like agri-tech, smart farming, e-farming, precision farming, because I don't like, when I'm talking to farmers, I don't like to think I'm totally obsessed with sperm. Right, potential benefits of AI to animal welfare. Obviously, 24/7 monitoring of health and welfare, leading to early detection of health and welfare problems. If you have early warning, you're less likely to use medication prophylactically, so reduction medication and antibiotics. You can specify and keep animals in optimum conditions of health and so. You can focus on the individual, which is what is meant by precision farming, whereas the individual often gets lost, for example, in large poultry flocks. And as Heather has been explaining, you can have animal-centered design and environments, giving animals opportunities to express behaviour that is important to them. And, as I'll come on to, you can use big data to uncover best and worst practice, to uncover causation is important. But I think it's also important to stress that AI threaten welfare. Simply backed up by, it can be seen to encourage intensification. There could be a backlash, like, just think that's all you're doing, you're just encouraging production at the expense of welfare, you're encouraging animals to be kept in large group sizes without contact with humans, and I think we've got to be aware of that. And a very real objection to AI in agriculture is that there's a lot of promise, but many of the improvements are not yet demonstrated, and the uptake is quite limited in certain sectors. And a number of people have warned that welfare could be endangered. So what I'd like to do today, really, is to think of ways in which we can ensure that AI goes in the direction, a positive direction for animal welfare, not in a negative direction. How can it help, not harm? And I'm going to argue that there are three things we can do. One is to have a definition of welfare that actually is going to encourage the good welfare, which is quite difficult because you need a definition which is broad enough to satisfy the general public, and that's captured under welfare, but also precise enough that you can capture it by an algorithm. The second thing is we need to develop welfare measurement, but in other words, sensors which give welfare a priority, both sensors of the primary data and also developing ways of interrogating big data sets. And then we need to demonstrate the value of AI in improving animal welfare to animals, to farmers, and to the public. Now, as far as definition is concerned, one possible starting point is where a lot of companies, food companies, farmers, producers, already are. And a lot of food companies use either the 5 freedoms or the 5 domains. For example, Purdue Farms in the States uses the 5 freedoms, McDonald's, Tyson, various other people use the 5 domains. And these list what people mean in an aspirational kind of way by animal welfare. But they are aspirational. They don't tell you what you have to do, what you have to measure. And one way of changing something, reducing something from its aspirations to something that can actually be put into practice is to actually say, well, what both of those reduce to are 2 things, that the animals are healthy and animals have what they want. So if you look at the first 3 of the 5 freedoms, they're all about keeping animals healthy. The second 2 are about giving them the opportunity to express behaviour they want to, and not having to be in situations they don't want to be in, which is very much ties in with what Heather's just been saying. The 5 domains are also about health, right behavioural interactions and so on. But if you just say that what these be distilled down to are the animals are healthy and the animals are what they want both. We've heard about the importance of giving animals what they want, but it's equally important that animals are healthy, because sometimes they conflict animals like humans. So you need 2 elements for good welfare. So, using AI to measure animal welfare means using it to demonstrate animal health and animals having what they want. And health is the first essential of good welfare. I think there are a huge number of applications with enormous potential for future applications. Here are some of the ways in which AI is being used for the assessment of animal health and disease. We've got thermal imaging, used by veterinary surgeons to look at changes in soft tissue like tendons and muscles. You've got sound recognition for recognising coughing, pigs or other animals to detect respiratory infection. You've got visual image of changes in posture to detect lameness and so on. There are huge numbers of different ways in which we now have sensors picking up animal health, signs of animal health and disease. One that I've been involved with is a system in which you have a camera, a small computer on the farm, and we measure the statistical patterns of flock movement. We don't track individuals, we look at the overall statistical patterns with optical flow, and we've discovered quite empirically that healthy flocks move differently from unhealthy ones. And it's able to detect problems, health problems in chicks that are less than a week old. It's actually quite sensitive. This is just one example. The green there are flocks that remain throughout their life free of Campylobacter, which is one of the major sources of food poisoning in humans and carried by chickens. The blue are the are flocks that turn positive for Campylobacter at some point during their life. You can see that the system separates the two quite clearly, and it does so when the birds are only a few days old, long before there are any clinical symptoms, or even that the Campylobacter can be detected in the bird's feces. Now, that was just done with 24 flocks. Think what you could do if you had lots more flocks recognising patterns of movement. The second element of good welfare is do the animals have what they want? And I think we can use AI to help us understand what animals want, as Heather has explained. It can help us to understand how animals express their emotions, how they tell us that they're with something they like, something they don't like. And it can help to design environments to help them on what animals want. So basically, there are lots of ways now of understanding what animals want. Obviously, one is will they use it, another is will they work for it. Giving them the choice not only tells us, gives the animal something, but it also tells us how much something matters to an animal. And in the case of the brushes that Heather mentioned, these cows will work really hard to switch on their brushes. They will push heavy gates to get their brushes to switch them on. They are telling us not just that they like them, but that they really matter to them. And you can do the same in chickens ways. So although we can study what animals want without AI, obviously using AI is going to give us much better information about these things. So what animals want is basically a shorthand for, like healthy animals, being in an environment that the animal itself finds rewarding, pleasurable, sometimes called being in a positive affective state, and not being in an environment that it finds stressful, frightening, or lacking things it needs, or making it fearful, anxious. In other words, a negative affective state. And it's very much an animal-centered way of defining welfare. And natural behaviour is often used, many people use cite natural behaviour as the key element of welfare, but as Heather explained, not everything natural is actually wanted by the animals, and we have to ask the animals instead. So we know, but there are lots of ways of asking animals what they want that's got nothing to do with AI. But AI gives us much, much better answers, and the possibility of really much better answers. For example, instead of just saying, do animals like this perch or that perch or this shaped perch or that shape, you can actually, if you have enough data, you could really examine things like, do they have different requirements at different times of day? Do they have different requirements, different preferences, depending whether they're trying to avoid other birds or avoiding heat? How does perching vary with age, with sex, are there individual differences? And so you could just make use of much more data. You can have heat maps showing how they do it. So many of us have spent hours sitting in a chicken house recording stuff, or sitting in front of a video screen, carefully transcribing stuff. With AI, you can do that, but you just have so much more data that it really is going to make the answers much more useful. It also, the second way is that AI is going to help with the understanding of animal languages, sounds, gestures, and emotional behaviours. In other words, we've done that, but lots of people know what behaviour animals show when they have what they want. What the animals what they want, they make pleasure twitters when they have what they want, when they're warm, they have food and companionship. When they're on their own, they make these ear-splitting distress calls. Now we knew that, but AI has given us a much deeper analysis of chicken sounds, giving us information about the frequency of the sounds and the intensity of the sounds, enabling more different distinctions to be made, enabling us to use the technology in practice, because you can then use AI to distinguish chicken sounds from background house noise, to distinguish male from female chicks, to give an estimate even of chicken weight, and to detect the first signs of disease. And as you probably know, there are now apps to interpret animal language, the language of chickens, the language of cats, and so on. And another way in which AI could help welfare is making much better use of what I call big data. Farmers, producers collect a huge amount of data about temperature, sometimes every 10 minutes, humidity, ventilation, behaviour, sound, and then, of course, they collect data about mortality and disease and injury, but they don't make terribly good use of it. And I think there's a huge potential for taking this vast amount of data and really doing something interesting with it. You can compare farms for best practice. Why do some farms get better results, lower mortality, lower disease, better welfare results than others? And you could use AI to actually find which of the input data and output data are related to each other. And the causes of problems. Why does some, what happens when you get problems like smothering? Could one identify factors in the farm that do that? And you can then have national and international standards. And it seems to be a huge pity that the enormous amount of data that is already collected is not actually being used and analysed in the best way. So, for example, if you ask a question like, is it better for welfare to have uniform lighting or what's called gradient lighting, as you see on the right-hand picture, in which the lights are lowered down and over the food, so the house has dark areas and light areas, particularly dark areas at the edges. And increasingly, this is being used because there is evidence that the chickens actually like they like to rest in the dark areas and feed in the light areas. It's better. They're actually choosing that in that way. And there have been small-scale experiments, but just think how much better those conclusions would be if instead of just saying, well, we've done it on one farm with four houses, whatever it is, you've looked at thousands of farms. You've looked at all the farms that had introduced these different kinds. So your data would be based on so much better evidence. And I think that the problem is not data quantity. AI can solve problems of data quantity. We do, however, have a problem of data quality. The big problem, one of the big problems with AI is data quality. Rubbish in, rubbish out. Biased data in, biased results out. And that, I think, is really holding up. And maybe we, in the agriculture, veterinary areas, need to take a lesson from the way human medicine has dealt with the problem of big data. Something like the British Biobank, for example, has actually got a huge and very well curated data set. So, for example, if you're interested in something like the connection between activity and genes or whatever, physical activity is not defined in some vague way about, oh yes, questionnaires say people are more active or something like that. Somebody took the trouble to give 100,000 participants the same bit of equipment wear on their wrist to measure how much activity they did in a week. So you can see that when you then try and use this, you know you're using really good data. And so if you ask a question like, how does physical activity and sleep relate, you can really validate, you're using valid data. And in veterinary medicine and agriculture, we just do not have that data. I think it's going to need somebody to actually do it. There are problems, of course, of confidentiality, because the data belongs to the farm, the producer. But so one would need to actually have a good reason for, give people a good reason for contributing that data. But I think this is going to be the future. We've got to do something about data quality. So the conclusions I would draw so far is that defining good welfare as animals being healthy and having what they want is actually a way of, I hope, avoiding a backlash, bringing people with us. And it describes what most people mean, or many people mean by good welfare. At the same time, it's precise enough to develop algorithms for good welfare. The development of technology to assess good welfare is making rapid progress, but it has a long way to go. But uptake, so far, is limited, and I think this is quite important. There was a report last November by McKinsey on whether agri-tech was being taken up by farmers. And their conclusion was that the priority for farmers is improving productivity. And that one of the reasons why there's been such slow take-up is because farmers are not convinced there's any return on investment, which is a hugely important thing. They're put off by the high cost, they're put off by any technology that's difficult to install, that needs a lot of maintenance, and they have not been convinced that there are short-term benefits. And I think this is really, if we want to improve animal welfare, we've got to make sure that the welfare tech is actually used. And I think we do have to demonstrate it, not just potentially, wouldn't this be a great idea to do, It actually has to be really improved welfare, improved health, giving animals what they want, demonstrating it is actually what they want. And I think one has got to think about production efficiency and financial returns. Because otherwise, farmers won't use it. And I cannot emphasise too much how big a gap there is between the lab and the farm, between the potential and the actual. You're up against, first of all, Murphy's Law, which is, if a thing can go wrong, it will. You will not imagine how many things can go wrong. Mice eating cables, high pressure hoses being used to clean delicate electronic equipment, an atmosphere that's dusty and full of and hot and moist. People unplugging your equipment. You would not believe what could go wrong. So you have to think about all those contingencies in order to make it right. The other is what I was taught as an undergraduate was the first law of animal behaviour, which is the animal is always one jump ahead. I came across a rather nice example last week, and somebody was describing a robot which was designed to go around a chicken house and pick up the eggs that have been laid on the floor, just floor-laying eggs. It's a problem because they get dirty and something like that. You want the chickens to lay in nest boxes so they can be collected on a conveyor belt. And the chickens loved the robot. They sat on the robot. They laid their eggs on the robot. When the robot parked for the night, they laid their eggs between the robot and the wall. In other words, the technology to address the problem of floor laying was actually making it worse. So you really have to try it out, and you're never quite sure until you've actually tried it out if it's going to work. Often there are benefits to both welfare and efficiency. Lower mortality is good for efficiency, good for welfare, lower levels of injury, lower disease levels, lower risk of human infection, less use of medication. Fine. I think we need to stress those if we want farmers to adopt welfare measures. But it doesn't always do that. Lower stocking densities, expensive or inconvenient enrichments may cost money. And I think design for welfare needs to take into account the cost to producers if it's to be used in practice and to achieve its aim of improving animal welfare. So, in conclusion, AI has the potential to improve two key elements of animal welfare. Health, through continuous monitoring with early warning, optimising environmental conditions, and big data to understand best and worst practice. Also, it can help us what animals want, with data-driven information about what they want in a quantitative way, and into animal-centred design. The second thing is fulfilling that potential. The technology must be robust and affordable. You've got to show that welfare is actually improved, not just an idea that it might be. We need better databases, but proper use of AI. And I think we need to think about other benefits, financial, environmental, so that improving animal welfare is seen as win-win rather than some conflict with these other things. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Marian. So, it seemed absent from your list of ways forward here was legal regulation. And when you gave the example of the UK biobank, it's a great example, but of course it's voluntary to put data into it. In the case of human impacts of AI, I think it's widely recognised that this industry requires legal regulation, and good governance here has to take that form. Why not say that as well in the farming case too? We could be requiring that people put their data into data sharing repositories.
Yes, and it would come with many of the same problems that we've had with sharing human medical data. The data, as I understand it, belongs to the farms that collect it. There are commercial sensitivities about sharing. That's why they have to be convinced that if they share it, they will get something back. But I agree, but I think we haven't even begun to think of the problems that would do. But I agree that would be essential.
I feel like there is a potential tension between using these tools to improve animal welfare on factory farms and farms, and that being a good thing, and then also the industry being able to use that to ameliorate their public image, and potentially mask important ethical issues. And I wonder how you think that balance should be struck.
I think it's very important that we bring the public with us and that the public are convinced that it's actually a genuine improvement in welfare. I think that's why I think it's important that everybody agrees that it's an improvement in welfare. For example, if you said to somebody, okay, it's an intensive farm, but we're actually giving animals, they're healthier and we're giving them what they want, I mean, that might go some way to changing their view about the intensive farm. Whereas, do you see what I mean? I think we just need to be open and honest about what we mean by welfare, agree what we mean by welfare, and then we might be surprised by the conditions in which good welfare is achieved. For example, it might be that indoor farming could give animals an environment that they like as much as a free-range environment that most people would think would be essential.
I guess just to extend on that, if the result is to improve the image of the factory farm because welfare is improved, there's still the problem of the animal doesn't want to be slaughtered, which I guess is the danger is we improve the conditions, which then prolongs factory farms being used in general rather than progress to eventually abolish them.
Okay, I think I have two answers. I mean, I think you're right. The issue of whether we kill animals at all is a separate one. But I think the point I would make is that many people would think you cannot have high welfare in an intensive indoor system. What I'm saying is, if you apply the criteria of health and giving animals what they want, it might be possible to do that, rather than assume that you can't.
I wanted to ask you, if you came across an example, a similar question of AI application to animal outdoor, where a farmer can actually transition to alternative system like regenerative farming or organic agroecology, and if you know of any example of how the AI have been used to implement welfare of animal on those systems?
So I'm not quite sure I fully understood the question. Is the question
that you come across, in your experience,
yes,
of using AI on outdoor system or
alternative
farming system?
I think so. Particularly on sheep, it's been used a lot for tracking, definitely, and making sure that animals that are roaming over a very wide distance, that somebody's keeping an eye on them. Definitely, yes.
Hello, yes, I had a question about government intervention, because obviously the government does subsidize farming very controversially, also depends on our resources. It sounds like you're suggesting that there would be perhaps more subsidization to help using what you call agri-tech to help them increase productivity and animal welfare at the same time. Is that what you were suggesting, or are there programs to do this as well? I get it, a farmer doesn't want to buy a whole bunch of data sensors. It's going to cost money when they're already absolutely under enormous pressure.
Exactly.
So are there government subsidies for agri-tech? Do you know?
I think there are some companies that are prepared to pay for that. Yes, I don't know of any state subsidies. But what I'm saying is I think there's quite a long way we can go with improving health that will maybe help productivity, but will also help welfare. I mean, we'll probably get to a point where there's a conflict, but I think there's a lot we can do that it's win-win and improving both.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very struck by your description of the reasons why a lot of farmers are reluctant to use AI and versus the kind of attitudes that I've encountered in the kind of salmon farming world, where it seems the embrace of automation and technology is much more rapid in that area, leading to big, I suppose, big excitement in that industry, but also big concerns about what is happening. Just wonder if you've experienced that difference as well, and if you have any thoughts on what the future is for fish farming.
I have to confess, I'm not very familiar with fish farming, but I agree that there is a definite issue with very gradual conditions that they have.
I was just wondering if you could clarify a bit about what goes into what animals want in your definition.
Yep.
So how much are you focused on, and obviously the extent to which and the ways in which AI can help figure out the difference between the two, right? So how much are you focused on what these animals in this shed want? So like kind of like direct preference version of that, and how much are you focused on what these types of animals, given their biology, tend to want? Because if you're thinking, well, I've improved welfare in this chicken shed because these chickens themselves aren't giving me any indication that they want anything differently, but I know that actually chickens would rather not be housed in a group of this size. Am I making sense, actually?
I'm not sure I completely understand your question.
I guess I'm wondering how subjective this, what they want is.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
If you define measuring what they want by whether they use it, whether they will work for it, I think that's fairly objective, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess one. If you're focused just on what the animals themselves can tell you they want or not, then I guess I'm wondering about the scope of your definition to help us think about what they might want that we're not offering, or that we don't have any potential to offer at all. And I might appeal to I know that chickens, they don't know that they would want to be in a different situation, but it would be better for them.
Right. So you mean there's a limit to our imagination of what to offer them?
Well, their knowledge, maybe their knowledge of their possibilities.
Yes. I mean, I think we just need to give them a wider variety of different choices, and to show whether that is dependent on their experience or not.
Thanks for the talk. You mentioned that you think there's a lot of potential win-wins, like a lot of low-hanging fruit. Do you have any ideas yet on what kind of situations there would be where this wouldn't work, like a welfare problem that you couldn't improve using this kind of radio?
I think the conflict arises with things like, we're talking about the slower growing breeds that take longer and are more expensive to rear, where people would argue that the welfare is higher. Reducing stocking density is costly because it takes up more space. Enrichments themselves can be costly, difficult to clean, and so on. So I think you do get to the point where there's a potential conflict.
But also that this kind of approach couldn't find other ways of solving those problems. For example, like a fast-growing breed of a broiler chicken has all these health problems. But if you're using a system like this, you could potentially find ways to reduce those problems, right? You can solve problems in different ways.
Yes, absolutely.
So is it the case that you think that this approach inherently has limits in what it could solve, or could it feasibly, maybe it could solve the problems that fast-growing chickens have just as well as a slower-growing breed? Because one thing I was also thinking, based on the last question, was that you're kind of you're just because you're giving chickens choices, you can only measure what choices they make based on what is in front of them. But it might be that if they were in a completely different system, they would have less suffering, right? Or they would be happier. So I'm just wondering if there's any kind of inherent limits like that, or if it's
Well, that would seem to be a limit of what you can think of to offer them by way of choice, wouldn't it? I mean, more a limit of human imagination of what to give them than an inherent difficulty with that. I mean, you can offer animals a choice between going outside or not outside, but they've offered cows a choice between going outside or not going outside. I mean, you can, if you think big, and you give the animals enough choices perhaps outside, you can actually have a very good idea of what they want, and you can expand the range of choices that they give them.
That's all the time we have for questions for now. Please give a warm round of applause to Marian